You're back with The Nation, and Labour's spokesperson on social development and children has been listening to the Minister Paula Bennett on her white paper. Good morning, Jacinda Ardern.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in this morning. So what do you think is missing from this white paper?
Unfortunately, this is a massive missed opportunity. What we desperately needed this white paper to do was lift the well-being of as many vulnerable children as possible and prevent abuse happening in the first place. And that particularly goes for the 270,000 children living in poverty. Unfortunately, this white paper hasn't touched those children.
So you don't agree with the focus on the 20 to 30,000?
It's far too narrow.
OK, we've just heard from Paula Bennett. She says poverty doesn't make you, in essence, hit your kids. She says poverty doesn't make you neglect your children.
Let's be absolutely clear. There is no excuse for child abuse and neglect, but there's also no excuse for politicians to ignore the evidence. And the evidence tells us that poverty is the biggest determinant for child wellbeing that we have. We cannot continue to ignore that in our policy development and in our responses.
Isn't this the kind of policy, though, where you need to potentially get on board and say, OK, here's the backbone. Here's the backbone of a policy on child abuse. Maybe we could do a cross-party policy on this. Shouldn't you at some level be supporting this?
Look, and if the measure is what can we do to better track children who are being abused, then sure, there are elements in the white paper that we would support. Training frontline workers, for instance, to identify abuse. That's a good, sensible proposal. But really what we needed from this white paper was so much more. And so while there'll be elements that we would support, we will continue to push the Minister to widen the scope of her activity in this area, because children in poverty, they are experiencing their own scars. The child who contracts rheumatic fever, for instance, costs the taxpayer $150,000 over the course of their life. They may not be abused, but they will wear the scars of poverty. Now, if we want to save the taxpayer money, if we want to improve the life and outcome of that child, we should be thinking about that vulnerable child as well.
What would Labor do then? If you look at the white paper, what would Labor do? How would you add to it?
Our starting point has got to be, let's get into the frame well before this child is even under threat.
How do you do that?
Well, we've got to focus on upskilling parents and giving them the tools that they need to be the best parents that they can be, because ultimately it is parents' responsibility.
There's always going to be, though, parents who aren't up to scratch.
Yeah, so let's start before mums are mums. Now, we've seen examples, for instance, with DHBs who are identifying vulnerable and at-risk mums before birth. They're working alongside those mums in the home. We could call it a souped-up version of Plunkett. They are seeing a 50% reduction in children being brought back into hospital as a result of assault and abuse. We know what's going to work. Let's use those professionals who are working in those mums' lives on a daily basis to make a difference. But secondly, income comes into it too. Your job is that much harder as a parent if you don't have adequate income to support your child and their well-being. So let's focus on giving those tools to parents. OK,
when you look, though, at the database sharing and the information, I mean, that's been a key problem, because if you look back to James Whakauru, that was 13 years ago. Labor didn't manage to get together its lines of communication either.
We absolutely have. Labor has some unfinished business. We've been clear on that. We lifted over 100,000 children out of poverty, but we've got much more to do. Now, on the databases, let's be clear. I thought this posed a massive opportunity when I heard the Minister say she'd bring together information on children. What she is proposing is a new platform, and not for all children, but for a narrow group that she's using a risky assessment tool that's got no evidence base behind it. What we should be doing is bringing together GP's information, Plunkett's information, checks we're doing at school. We have 10 different databases. The Minister isn't bringing those together.
She is shutting the door on mandatory reporting. Would you shut the door on mandatory reporting?
I think what she's proposed in that regard is sensible. You know, bringing in mandatory reporting before you train your frontline workers to identify abuse is, I think, a mistake.
Once they're trained up, would you introduce mandatory reporting?
Yeah, I think maybe that's something that you keep an eye on, see what progress we're making. But one other point on mandatory reporting, if you bring that in before you've got the resource to deal with the cases that are being reported, and we have a severely understaffed, under-resourced SIFs, that would also be problematic. OK, I asked the Minister, I'll ask you as well. A Minister for Children, a good idea? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would Labor look to introduce this before the next election, or if they were to be elected?
The reason I'm spokesperson for children is to indicate our intention to have a Minister for Children and a Ministry for Children. We believe that there are massive savings to be made for taxpayers by being much more focused on early intervention and prevention. A Minister for Children would bring together housing, justice, health, education, and bring about the kind of action Kiwis expect and improve the outcomes for kids. That's what this is all about.
All right, we have to leave it there. Thank you. Jacinda Ardern, Labor spokesperson on social development and children.